Hey guys, welcome back for another sponsored video. Very exciting. This is the second video I get to do with Camera Ready Cosmetics this year. If you missed the first one, it was a little bit more of an informative video about alcohol versus water activated paints. So if you're interested, I will link it up here if you guys want to go check that out. But for today's video, I thought we would jump a little bit more into the makeup creating and the fun spooky season, and I want to show you 3 ways to create wounds, 2 of which are latex free, so if you have a latex allergy, these might be good options for you. Not only make the 3 different wounds, but also how to paint them to help bring them to life a little bit more, and also show you the difference in not only application, but how you get the end effect of like blend lines and realism versus maybe something that's a little bit trickier to manipulate. So if you're interested in seeing any of that, then let's just jump into it. Oh, and just before we jump in, I know it's tedious and it's not always fun, but please remember to do a patch test if you've never used these products before. A lot of SFX products are a little bit stronger and can cause harsher reactions on the skin if you have an allergy that you're unaware of. Latex allergies are very common. Some people also react to things like the adhesives, the removers, stuff like that. So it's always good to just do a little patch test right here on the thin skin on your inner elbow area. I know it can be one extra step, but totally worth it than finding out the really hard way if you do have a reaction or to something. So please do that. The first method is going to be the one that you've probably seen the most, and that is the latex and tissue method. So we're going to be using some Mayron liquid latex, a regular old tissue, and some application tools. After taking out some liquid latex to dip into, I like to put down a thin layer on the area that I want the wound to be first. This gives the Kleenex something to grip to and a good starting base for the wound you want to create. From there, you want to work with single ply tissue, and the easiest way to do that is just to kind of take apart a double ply tissue since most are built that way. I roll them into little worms to kind of create the edges of the wounds. A common method with latex and tissue that I don't really do myself is to lay down the tissue and then cut it open once it's dried. Both for the fact that this usually involves sharp objects, which isn't great, but also because when the skin is cut open on the body, it would actually curl inwards to try and start healing itself. Unless it's a crazy massive wound, the skin doesn't really tear open that way, so this is, I find, a bit of an easier way to get a more realistic wound look. When you get the worms in place, you just want to try and blend out the edges best you can by kind of softening the latex outwards. And if you need to adjust or fix up the latex while it's still wet, I find using a metal spatula is really helpful to kind of dig in there and move it around, and then let it dry fully. When it is dry, you do just want to go over it with a little bit of powder. This is just to get rid of the tackiness, so that way when you're painting or pushing on it, you're not going to accidentally lift anything. And before jumping into painting, I just want to go over some of the fake blood I like to use when painting stuff like this. The advantage to having a fresh, dark, and scab blood is that fresh blood will often have a thinner consistency and be a vibrant red as if it is fresh. Dark blood will tend to have a lot of deeper tones to it as if it is aged and has been sitting outside of the wound longer. And scab blood is fantastic for adding texture as well as adding a thicker, coagulated style blood to the interior of wounds. So then for painting the wound, I am going to be using an alcohol activated palette. These ones are from European Body Art as well as the activator. And this is kind of what I'm going to do as a formula for all of my wounds, since this is kind of my go-to, and that is to add first a nice bright red to the base and interior of the wound where the blood would be coming from, followed by some of the deeper reds in the palette, and then a bit of blue, since these two together always add a lot more depth. You can always use a little bit of black, but it's easy to kind of go overboard. The blue tones will get you that depth and darkness without always having to use black. With the other methods, I don't find this step as necessary, but with latex, because you'll be able to see the color of the tissue coming through, you might have to put a little bit of foundation or concealer on to try and blend it more into your skin. This is where I would say latex, of the 3 methods I'm going to show you, is probably the hardest to get a seamless or convincing blend line, because latex has texture to it and it doesn't take makeup the same way your skin naturally does, so this is probably one of the trickier ones for that. Something to kind of help with this though, and that I do with all of my looks anyways, is take a stipple sponge and a little bit of the blood colors in your palette and start stippling it along the wound. This both helps to add visual texture, which always is good in any makeup look, especially when you're thinking about blend lines, and also helps mimic the broken capillaries or trauma to the skin that can occur when you actually get a wound. For adding fake blood, remember, it's really easy to go overboard with fake blood and then you kind of ruin, the entire point of building up and creating a fake wound if you just cover the entire thing. So my go-to method usually is to fill the inside of the wound with a little bit of the scab blood. Again, there's that texture there, it adds a nice shine. And then I'll follow that up with one of the less viscous fake bloods, and for this one I was using the fresh blood. Stipple it a little bit around the wound as well, and then you can always let it drip out in a certain direction if you like. I kind of did the idea that if my hand was just hanging down, it would maybe eventually start going that way, moving with gravity. So you always want to kind of keep it within a realistic setting of how blood would work. The second method for creating a wound is using scar wax, and this can be a fantastic and versatile product, but can be a little bit tricky to work with. So I'm going to show you some tricks to kind of help. The first being to lay down a base of spirit gum where you want to apply the scar wax. This is helpful because you can tap it a little bit to create that tacky base with a little bit of texture, and this means that when you start to apply the scar wax, it will have a better chance to grip to your skin instead of hanging onto your fingers, which can be a common problem. As the name suggests, it is a quite waxy substance. I like to use a metal spatula to scoop some out, and then you can start warming it up in your fingers, and as it gets warm, it becomes far more malleable. So I like to create the little worms with it and then start laying it down. Once it starts getting warm though, it gets a little bit stickier, so it can be hard to get off of your fingers, which is why I like to use a little bit of Vaseline on the tips of my fingers. And then as you lay it down, it will have a much better chance to just stick to the spirit gum and blend in where you want it to. I find the best way to blend it is a mix of different tools and your own fingers because you have the warmth from your body. But I like to start with kind of squishing down the edges with either a metal spatula or a silicone blending tool. Both work fantastic. And then from there, you can even carve out the inside to create some little extra extensions in the wound. And then to really start blending the edges in, I find taking a little bit more Vaseline on your fingertips and using that to go along the edges really works with scar wax, because again, the natural heat from your body is going to start warming the scar wax, and it's going to almost kind of be able to melt into your skin and get a softer blend line. Something just to note with scar wax, and I kind of mentioned it back in my Resident Evil video from a few years ago, is that you do want to try and keep it on areas that don't get too much bending, because it does kind of cool and harden back up to its waxy substance, and you can see you can get a little bit of cracking in areas like this. So you want to try to just keep it to more flatter sections of either your face, hand, neck, something like that, so it has a better chance of lasting the night. And then the paint job for this is pretty much the same steps as when we just did for the latex. Different types of reds, but I did want to make this one seem a little bit more aged, so I went with the darker blood as well as made it so there wasn't as much blood in the wound, because it would have kind of either coagulated or dried up and just be more central to the wound itself. And then just a fun quick extra thing you can do that's a really nice simple way to add a little bit of dimension to a fake wound is to take a stipple sponge with some of the fresh or dark blood, and you kind of pull it along your skin to make little scratches, so you can easily create that effect of like road rash or getting a scrape, punching a wall really hard, something like that. And proof here, because I accidentally did go overboard, very easy to do with blood, is that you can go back with a little bit of the 99% alcohol and kind of pick it back up so that it's maybe not as crazy looking as I first made it. The final method I'm going to show you is using third degree silicone. This is a 2-part silicone product and can create some pretty beautiful effects. Being a 2-part silicone, this does have an A and a B component. It is a 1-to-1 ratio, so you can either measure it out with a scale or you can eyeball it, just making sure that the amounts are very close together. One thing you do want to be sure of is that you do not accidentally cross-contaminate, because then you will completely ruin the entire pot of A or B. So I find the easiest way to do this is just mark a popsicle stick with A, a popsicle stick with B, and then they are only allowed to go into those pots. From there, you can mix it together on your mixing spatula, and then you are ready to work with it. For applying, it's going to be kind of the same style as the other two for creating little worms side by side that connect to create the little wound sections. The only difference being is you're going to kind of pull it along with the spatula instead of applying an actual worm to your skin. And then from there, what I usually do is I dip my spatula into a little bit of 99% alcohol and use that to help blend out the edges. And then you can even use your fingers a little bit if you want to, with again, just a little bit more alcohol. If you're like me and found that while blending the edges of the wound got a little bit too flat, you can go back and add a little bit more depth to just the edging with a little bit more silicone. One thing to note with third degree silicone is you have about a 5-minute working time, so you do want to make small batches and work in small sections, because if you mix too much up at once, it'll probably cure before you get to actually putting it on your skin. Now, one thing third degree is really good for, as the name might suggest, is for creating burn wounds, which means that it actually has a shine to it, because burned skin usually does have a shine on the scar tissue. But if you want to knock that back for creating wounds like this, all you need to do at the end is once everything dries, it'll harden entirely so you'll know it's cured, and then go over it with a little bit of translucent powder to kind of knock back that shine. And not to get too repetitive, so pretty much the same painting steps. The only thing I was kind of doing a little bit different here is I did push a little bit more of the black and blue colors right into the edge of these wounds. And that is because I wanted to add a little bit of extra fun to this one and need the edges to be darker, but the centerpieces to be pretty red. So what I wanted to add to this one was a bit of fake glass, and this is SFX glass. So it's actually a silicone, it's bendy, it is completely safe. Please don't use actual glass or plastic or anything like that, but it has a really cool effect because it looks very, very realistic, but is actually completely safe to use. And to do this, I'm just applying a little bit of Prosade into the wounds themselves and then onto the fake glass pieces. And once they go clear, meaning the Prosade is good to use, I went ahead and kind of stuck them into the fake wounds we had just built. From here, you can add blood as desired. I went ahead and added the scab blood in between all of the glass pieces, as well as along the base of them to try and kind of hide where they're obviously placed. And then I took a little bit of the fresh blood and not only incorporated that into the wounds a bit, but started adding them to the very edges of the glass to kind of help showcase the edges a bit better from further away. But again, you don't want to go overboard here because you want to be able to see that glass and get the effect, but also then kind of highlight it so that it looks even more grungy and gross in the best way possible. And then if you want to get some fun little connecting strings of blood between the wounds, all you have to do is take that blood on the stipple sponge and kind of go back and forth, just dabbing it down, and it'll kind of create its own little connection points. So there you have it, 3 different wounds, 3 different ways. You might find that you really thrive with certain materials, whereas others you might find a little bit annoying. So it's kind of fun to play around and get a feel for what you really enjoy as an artist. Admittedly, of the 3, my favorite was probably the silicone one, just because I'm a sucker for like good blend lines, and I was really proud of my blend lines on that one, so it sways me in that direction. But they're all fantastic options for creating some good wounds for some makeup looks. Thank you so much again to Camera Ready Cosmetics for wanting to work with me this year. I really appreciate it, and I love working with them. So I hope we were able to bring you guys some really exciting videos that will help you out in this Halloween season, or just any time during the year, because Halloween is year-round, obviously. As always, please feel free to leave any comments or questions you have down below. I'm happy to get back to them, especially if I've missed something that you maybe want a little bit more clarification on. Happy to go over it with you. I will also have a link to everything in the description, so check it out. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Thank you guys so much for watching. I, of course, will see you next video. So until then, bye guys.